Hello and welcome back to the Center for Applied Theology. Today we will be discussing the question of reading in Lent. There's probably no more timely a topic, especially when in the Western world they have already entered this sacred season, and we in the Eastern and Orthodox world will be doing so very shortly. So I have with me Father Timothy Curtis, and we will be talking about the kinds of things that are most appropriate, perhaps to undertake as a reading project through Lent. And so I will now turn to Father Timothy and ask him if he has any suggestions and ideas. Father Timothy.
Hello, Father James. I'm at St. Anne's, the study at St. Anne's Church today. So just to remind everyone, if you want to be notified of when these conversations go up on YouTube, there's a button down there that says subscribe. Press subscribe, but also click on the bell, and you'll get notified as soon as these films go live on YouTube. So we're going to talk and have a conversation today about Lenten reading, and quite often people will say, what do I read? What should I be looking at? And there are obvious classical texts like the Way of the Pilgrim that are read during Lent. But perhaps, particularly for people who are new to Orthodox Christianity, we might want to step away from those classical texts. You may have already read them. So my starting point, I think, is a text that you will hear during the Divine Liturgy, and that's the Liturgy of St. Basil that you'll hear throughout Lent. As we start into Lent, we shift from the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom into the Liturgy of St. Basil, which means your liturgies will be longer, but the anaphora, particularly the prayers of consecration, are beautiful. So you get hold of a text and start reading. They're very dense texts, so just read that. That's what the priest has read or is reading. In some traditions, the priest will be saying this quietly, but certainly in our parish, this is read aloud. But if you don't get to hear it, then I would recommend spending your time reading this carefully and dwelling on it. Even in the English, I don't read the Greek, but I'm sure the Greek is absolutely fantastic and beautiful. But even the English is extraordinary. And if you were never to read the Bible, but to read the anaphora of St. Basil the Great, you would understand the whole of the Christian message, the gospel. And that's why it's so beautiful for me to be able to celebrate it, but also every year to be able to dwell on this text and look at it very carefully. So spending time reading this again and again is probably really important.
Well, I know when we were preparing for this conversation today, you used the word slow reading, and I really appreciated that, because when I think about the anaphora of St. Basil, and I've had the opportunity not just to celebrate it, but also to stand back outside of the liturgical context and read through the prayer, as long as it is, it makes for profoundly edifying reading. And it's not something you need to read through only once and contemplate. Rather, it's something you can return to, perhaps even on a daily basis or throughout the week in between celebrations of the Divine Liturgy. But I quite agree with you. I think the way it sort of draws together the truths of the Christian faith and really stirs up the heart in response to the reality that God loves us as he does is probably unsurpassed. And I would strongly recommend it to the faithful.
Absolutely, and reading it and allowing the text to kind of speak to you and kind of suggest a word or a phrase, and dwelling on, stopping and praying about that phrase, and maybe doing some research on what that phrase means or where it came from, its scriptural basis, remembering that the text is saturated with scripture. My second text is offering is a little bit more weighty, and forgive the well-thumbed version of this. This is the Lenten Triadion, that is a translation by Mother Mary and Metropolitan Callistos Ware. And I would draw people's attention to the first part of the book, that is a chapter written by Metropolitan Callistos on the nature of fasting and the fast. So we talked last week about fasting And it's a good read in its own right, just the chapter. But then again, it's also all of the text, all of the variable texts of particularly the Matin services, the morning services, which so very rarely are served in Orthodox parishes these days, that take you through. So if you want daily reading, as it were, a daily meditation, then you can't go very far wrong by picking this up and reading the prayers of the Church through the Triadion. So this is the all the variable parts throughout the start of Lent, or pre-start to the Lent, right the way up to Holy Week. There's plenty of copies of that around, I think.
I think the essays are sort of really superb introductions into what we understand by Lent in the Eastern tradition, and strongly commend them, as you just have. But I would also say that I think sometimes because we're used to hearing conversations like, what are you going to give up for Lent? What are you doing for Lent? It gives us a sense that somehow we have to invest our own creativity in the Lenten practice, and yet so much is already there for us. And I found reading the introductory essays, as they discuss even the Lenten lectionary, the logic of it, and as you say, the practice of fasting, it really helps you appropriate the Orthodox tradition and helps you realize that Lent isn't about your creativity and what you invest in it, but rather how the Church can speak to you where you are and facilitate your rapprochement to God. And yeah, I think the volume itself is extremely helpful in that regard.
Yes, in a way, we don't give anything up for Lent. We take on more stuff. The fast is not really giving up for Lent. It's taking on a burden of ascesis, of preparation for the great feast and the great celebration of Holy Week and the resurrection of Christ. So I don't see it necessarily as I'm choosing to give this up or that up. The Church prepares us well for the fast through meat fare and cheese fare, and then to the fast, lightening the fast and making the fast more strict as we go through Lent. So the Lenten Triadion and the chapter there in that book on the fast is a very good way for you to be able to acquire a sense of what the fast is about without it becoming, as you say, a personal creative act of I'm choosing to do this. And we should always, just to remind us, we should never really be choosing ourselves what to fast, particularly if we are on medication, or if we're on a particular diet, or suffering from any health condition. We should always be checking with our GP, but also to fast in concert with our parish priest, asking him, how should I fast? So if in any doubt, it's not our personal choice, it's a collaboration with our parish priest in the same way as we collaborate with our parish priest when it comes to confession and absolution.
And to be clear, Father, if I might just jump in.
Yeah.
The reason for the collaboration is not because the parish priest is some kind of absolute infallible authority. It is because we are together a family of pilgrims, and the parish priest may sit at the steering wheel, or whatever metaphor you want to use, but that if we are to undertake these things together, it's best that we have that reference point. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I use the word collaboration quite carefully there, because it's not about getting permission or him being in control. And it might be your spiritual father, might not be your parish priest, but your spiritual guide. It's about being responsible to somebody else. So our Christian life is founded in being responsible and accountable to other people, rather than only being accountable to ourselves. So if we are making choices about the fast for ourselves, we're not accountable to anybody else apart from God. whereas Orthodox Christianity is always about our accountability to God and to one another, to our neighbour. And that's manifested, it's made visible by our being accountable to our parish priest as our parish spiritual guide, or to our spiritual father if we have a person who is otherwise our spiritual father, but always being referring to someone who's a more experienced Christian to give us that guidance, to ensure that we don't become Pharisees, we don't dive into this in an uncontrolled or inexperienced way. We don't have to do this unguided. It's the important thing. There are plenty of people with lots of experience who can guide us to make sure that we are not rushing off in the wrong direction. And my final text to offer is something that we, by tradition, sing in its entirety in the first week of Lent, and then return to during the week of St. Mary of Egypt, which is the canon of St. Andrew of Crete. So if you want to get spiritual indigestion by reading the entire text, it's probably about 2 or 3 hours worth of reading. I don't have a bound copy, but this is the text. It's a beautiful meditation on sin. And I mean that. It's a beautiful meditation on personal sin and our accountable to one another, accountability to one another and accountability to Christ. But it's sung and sung in a series of prayers throughout the first week. And its text is, even in the English translation, is still beautiful. The first ermos, the first refrain, he begins, "He is my helper and protector and has become my salvation. This is my God and I will glorify him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him, for gloriously has he been glorified." It's just an extraordinary way of starting a text that is primarily about becoming more and more aware of our sin, and meditating on that and awakening our soul to the awareness of our sinfulness. And we can spend a lot of our life, I think, going through thinking, I'm not that sinful really. And this text really helps us to sharpen our senses with respect to the extent to which we can reject God or ignore God. And that's really what the root of sin is. And that's probably an excuse for another conversation. What is sin? But it also, this text is saturated with some beautiful paradoxical theology. Just picking on one, which is the Traperia to the Trinity. Let us glorify the Father, exalt the Son, and faithfully worship the Divine Spirit, inseparable Trinity, unity in essence as light and lights, life and lives, giving light and life to the ends of the earth. And this refrain gets picked up at the end of each of the stanzas, each of the main prayers. This unity in essence, light and lights, life and lives, light and life to the ends of the earth is wonderful theology, but also beautiful poetry. Brings the Welsh accent back out in me.
Wonderful, and wonderful suggestions. The one thing I would want to finish with perhaps then is a quick comment on Lenten apps. Now, you and I have discussed these before, but I just wonder if we might just take a moment to comment on them now. I know I certainly have a few thoughts on them, but what would be your initial response to the idea of the use of a Lenten app?
Yes, usually this time of year I'll get a text saying, "Father, if you've got can you suggest an app for me for Lenten reading?" Yeah, I understand what you're trying to do, but there are two reasons why I'm cautious about using an app. And this, I think, refers to where we started with this conversation with respect to slow reading. And I'll let you talk about that more. But my first concern is that with respect to apps, there's a lot of variability in the quality of the apps, and we can't be sure that they have the blessing of their bishop to be published, and we can't be sure about the accuracy of the translation, the accuracy of the app itself. So I am cautious. I do use apps for lectionaries and stuff like that on the fly. But when it comes to making sure that something is correct and something has been verified and something has been published with the knowledge of one's ruling bishop, then we need to be a little bit careful about apps. That's my point on that. But when it comes to reading in Lent, that's a different thing.
I guess that's where I'll jump in, because my take is related but slightly different, and that is to say, well, I made a very light-hearted tweet on Twitter the other day, which is probably telling in itself, but what I said then was simply that I felt so tethered to my device that I felt as if perhaps at the end of the day I was dumber for it. And one of the reasons I said that was simply because even as conscious as I am of the need to read quality material, the fact is, well, I'm on social media. And I'm, as I reflect on my own life, I'm never sure that even while it's a tool, it serves me all that well in my intellectual life and my spiritual life. And I think Lent is a good time to set the devices aside, if at all possible, and actually read. I can't, from a personal point of view, but also from a more general point of view, oversing the praises of the book. And there is a different kind of engagement between the words on the page and words as they might emerge for us on a screen in small chunks. There's a holistic involvement, I think, with the content when we open up a book that we don't get when we experience the same words through a screen, broken down as they are. But it's not just that. I think, psychologists suggest that working in the same space in which we sleep is not always a helpful thing. And I think devices are a bit like that. There's a sense in which we end up binding together our work lives, our leisure lives, our intellectual lives, and unfortunately, even our spiritual lives, because we come to depend on those handheld devices. And I think that for the sake of our spiritual health, it's worth coming in the door at the end of a work day or wherever it is we've been and putting our telephones on the kitchen counter with the intention of not touching them. And the same goes for our iPads or whatever, in order that we might pick up a book. And I would say any book, other than the trashiest of novels, if we are immersing ourselves in a world of beauty, of goodness, of love, of art, then there will be something to extract from it that will feed us. And so really, to somebody who asks me, what should I read for Lent? I would say that. Read anything. As long as it's good, read anything. That isn't to in any way contradict what you said, because I would say on top of those fundamentals, those elements of prayer that we can take away with us and digest through the week. But certainly there is no harm in adding a novel to that, or in adding a work of spiritual edification, like, for example, Callistus Ware's The Orthodox Way, or the Orthodox Church, or The Way of the Pilgrim, or anything like that. So read.
Yes, so those who know me, I'm not a technophobe at all, and I love my device as much as anybody else, and I'm just as much attached to it. But I think, Lenten reading, whatever we're reading, needs to be sacramental. So, step away from your device, put it down, switch it off, put it in a different room, light a candle, and read your text deeply, and let the words sink in. And you might not get quite as much from a trashy novel, but if it's good English, good, or whatever language you're reading, or if it's well written, then let it sing in your heart.
Wonderful. I think on that note, we will hopefully have offered something to our listeners to contemplate and to inspire them as they move through Lent, as we all do as one church.
Have a beautiful Lent.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it somehow informative, please be sure to click like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would also love it if you visited the Centre on the web at www.appliedtheology.org.uk and took out a membership. At £20 per year, your membership is one of the main means of support on which we depend to carry out our work. Finally, look for us on social media. We can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just do a search for the Centre for Applied Theology. We look forward to having you join us.